Right.
Good morning, everyone. I think you all got the notice that we are recording this webinar, but just a reminder that we are. And also another reminder to keep yourself muted just to avoid background noise. And then just to clarify with Maren, would you like questions in the chat? Is that okay? Can we do that? And do you want them throughout the presentation or just at the end?
Went to unmute myself and apparently cruised my way through the PowerPoint. Okay. I will be watching the chat as I talk, and there will be spots throughout where we'll have discussion in the chat. So there'll be plenty of time.
Okay, sounds good. All right, then why don't we get started? I'm just going to do a quick introduction here. Excuse me. My name is Amy Dahlman, and on behalf of Dancing Sky Area Agency on Aging and Central Minnesota Council on Aging, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. And for those of you not familiar with the area agencies on aging, there are actually 7 in the state of Minnesota. Dancing Sky covers 21 counties in Northwest and West Central Minnesota, and Central Minnesota Council on Aging services 14 counties in Central Minnesota. And I also want to share that if you're not familiar with the area agencies on aging, I welcome you to visit. There's a website. It's mn4a.org. So again, mn4a.org, and you can find more about the area agencies on aging in Minnesota. And we offer many services, but certainly in the interest of time, we want to dive into the webinar. We were really excited by the tremendous response we had to this topic, and we're so excited to partner with Rainbow Health and Maren. And so I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to toss it over to Maren. And Maren, thank you again so much for doing this.
Absolutely.
In progress.
All right. Can folks hear me okay? I'm assuming yes.
Sounds good. I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. So my name is Maren Levad, she, her, hers. I'm the aging advocate at Rainbow Health Minnesota. And just to get a little business out of the way, I will be putting in the chat as well as asking Amy to email y'all whoever signed or this Zoom conversation, the CEU form that I just need you to fill out to get your certificates for this. So I will be doing that at the end of the presentation, and then hopefully it can be emailed out as well. But today we're talking about working with LGBTQ older adults and staff. I can't see all of you. Most of you have your cameras off, which is fine, but just if there's any needs, or I am monitoring the chat, so please use that to communicate with me as we present. All right.
I got in. Thank you.
So just before we begin, a little bit about who my organization is. So we're Rainbow Health. We respond to the health needs of Minnesota's LGBTQ+ and HIV affected communities with a whole person approach, which means right now our 5 main focuses are elders and older adults, housing assistance, mental health. So we have a whole behavioral health clinic, financial and economic assistance, and access to free or low-cost medications. So that is who we are. Many folks used to know us as the Minnesota AIDS Project, so we have been around since the 80s. And yes, I will be emailing this. I can share this PowerPoint with Amy as well. So what are our objectives today? Our objectives are, we're going to describe LGBTQ history and how it impacts older adults seeking services. We're going to talk about the impact of HIV and AIDS on older LGBTQ adults a little bit. That's not our main focus today, but just so you know, that will be discussed today. And then we're going to learn strategies, resources, and tools to serve the LGBTQ population in whatever areas that you may work. So most of you probably know what all this stands for, but I like to just ground us because I never know, especially on a virtual presentation, where folks are at in terms of their exposure to this community. So just as a reminder, LGBTQ plus contains a very, very broad group of folks. So LGB, which is what most people are really familiar with, that's lesbian, gay, and bisexual, that specifically references someone's sexuality. And so that is the LGB. Then we have our T, which is our trans, and that specifically references someone's gender. So someone could be trans and straight, someone could be trans and gay. So that is very kind of an interesting combination of folks. And then Q is the word queer and plus, so that could be sex, sexuality, gender, that includes two-spirit, intersex, asexual, and Q is a letter we use, recognizing that the broader community has really taken that on board, but recognizing at the same time that some of our elders, the word queer was used against them as a slur, and so it's not a word that everyone within the community is comfortable with, and so that's really something that we just kind of play by ear in terms of working with our older adults. Okay, so in that vein, talking about that Q letter, I just want to do a quick note before we begin. So on the screen, you will see a group of gentlemen in polyester 70s garb, feeling themselves in a catalog, you know, looking great in those strong patterns and colors. In the center, we have the band Vixen from the 80s. It's 4 women who have a lot of hairspray in their hair and are wearing some interesting lycra pleather outfits. And then on the right, we have NSYNC from the 90s, all in denim 90s pop outfits. And the reason that I have these here is because all of us, I think, recognize that fashion is an art and fashion changes. It is a constantly evolving thing. If you've ever tried to go jean shopping, you know that if you found jeans that fit you perfectly 3 years ago, they're probably not selling it today because they have changed how the cut or the fit or how high the waist goes, because fashion is
Video now unmuted. Zoom. A yellow circle with white text on a black background. 145. Start my video. Button. Mute my audio. Button.
However, we also have to recognize that language is an art. So language changes and evolves. The words that were used 10, 20, 100 years ago oftentimes are not in the vernacular today. And so that is the same thing in terms of how we use inclusive language. I like to reference the disability community. So 100 years ago, you might have been perfectly okay referring to someone as retarded or an imbecile. And then in the 1950s, that became less acceptable, and it became developmentally retarded. And then in the 70s and 80s, it became someone with a developmental disability. And then now we say a person with a developmental disability. So that language has changed. And I just want to remind you that whatever I say today, we just want to keep up on culture because we recognize that language shifts and it changes. And so I may say something today that 5 years from now may have gone out of fashion. So just a reminder about language. As we move forward, we're going to be using 2 clients that are an amalgamation of folks that we work with to help us kind of frame this around real people. So Maggie and Jim are personas. So Maggie is 87 years old and identifies as transgender and straight. She uses the pronouns she and her. Maggie has some forgetfulness due to vascular dementia and receives some services. Maggie has a son who lives in another state. And then we have Jim, who's 81 years old and identifies as a gay man and uses the pronoun he and him. Jim's partner, who did most of the cooking and house maintenance, died of complications from Alzheimer's disease. He relies on a network of friends to check in on him. So we're going to be looping back to Maggie and Jim and seeing how everything we discussed affects folks like Maggie and Jim in the future. Okay, so we began this presentation really talking about LGBTQ history typically. However, there is a lot going on in the news. And so before we get to that history, we want to really ground ourselves in what's happening now. And so for those of you who follow this stuff, you won't be surprised to hear that the American Civil Liberties Union is tracking 461 anti-LGBTQ bills in the US 2023 legislative session. That's about 130 more than last year. And currently 31 have passed. And what does that include? That really includes drag bans, ID limitations, so laws that seek to limit changes in legal documentation, which directly impacts trans people of all ages, transgender girls in sports, bathroom bills, banning medically appropriate care for transgender teens, books in the library, and things like Don't Say Gay. And I want to just take a moment to really ground ourselves in why this is happening. I think some folks, hear that, oh, well, all of these bills are being passed is because there's so many more transgender people, or there's so much more in your face LGBTQ things happening and we're moving too fast. And I just want to read directly from an article that was in the New York Times this weekend. And they state that when the Supreme Court declared a constitutional right to same-sex marriage nearly 8 years ago, social conservatives were set adrift. The ruling stripped them of an issue they had used to galvanize rank and file supporters and big donors. And then Terry Schilling, the president of the American Principles Project, a social conservative advocacy group, said, "We knew we needed to find an issue that the candidates were comfortable talking about, and we threw everything at the wall. What has stuck is the issue of transgender identity. Today, the effort to restrict transgender rights has supplanted same-sex marriage and abortion rights as an animating issue. It has reinvigorated a network of conservative groups, increased fundraising, and set the agenda in school boards and legislatures." So I think it's important to recognize that this new push for, as I said, 461 anti-LGBTQ bills. So if you look at the dark, so we're talking about more than 10 anti-LGBTQ bills in front of the North Dakota legislature, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arizona, Texas, Florida. And the reason that the conservatives are saying that is because they are finding it a rallying cry. It is replacing things that they used to be able to raise money for. And so it is really a political movement to raise money for conservative candidates. So I think it's important to recognize that and to also be aware that this new attention and this negative attention is really affecting our community. So a 67-year-old transgender man that we work with said, I have worked hard for many years to be authentic, to be truly the person I know myself to be. And now I feel like I need to hide part of myself. And a 62-year-old lesbian said, I'm going to be driving through rural Wisconsin to visit friends next week. I'm not sure how I feel about having a Dancing Women rainbow sticker on my bumper. I think I'll take it off. All right, so knowing how people are feeling today, we're going to do a little history quiz. So if you have any sort of paper, I'll ask you to kind of write down your right answers and we'll go through them. But the reason that we do this is it's important to remember not just what's happening now, but what our LGBTQ older adults have lived through and are aware of, and how that affects.
If you guys have any issues with being able to attend, let me know, but appreciate the move.
So first of all, what was the first quote unquote successful treatment for homosexuality?
Place that they do good work there. So.
And then what did the APA include in its first list of psychological disorders? And when did AMA remove sexual orientation from its official list of disorders? So I see Jane in the chat got the first question right. And so that is the first, we'll get to there, but the first successful treatment for homosexuality was electroshock treatment, and that was in 1935. So they believed that one could be shocked out of being a homosexual. When the APA first listed what is now known as the DSM, homosexuality was listed there, and it was removed in 1973. However, language was rewritten, so it was changed from being obviously homosexuality to pretty much still sexuality, and until 1986. So 1986 is really when homosexuality has been removed from the DSM for psychological or mental disorders. All right, next questions. The federal government banned lesbians and gays from federal employment. True or false? The Reagan administration approved federal funding research about and treatment of AIDS. True or false? And then what does Dr. Fauci have to do with the history of HIV and AIDS? So this is like less fun to do on a virtual, I recognize, so we'll just kind of move along. So yes, the federal government did ban lesbians and gays from employment during the Cold War. It was considered, a heightened concern of internal security, and they wanted to rid the department of communists and homosexuals. And they established a set of security principles that went on to inspire the creation of a dual loyalty security test. And basically anyone who was quote unquote disloyal included communists, anyone who was friends with communists, those guilty of espionage, along with people with habitual drunkenness, sexual perversion, moral turpitude, financial irresponsibility, or criminal record. So that was the case until, between 1947 and 1950, over 1,700 applicants to federal jobs were denied due to allegations of homosexuality. So the Reagan administration did not approve federal funding. They believed that the AIDS epidemic was a moral response to something, and it wasn't It wasn't the responsibility of the federal government, and he did not even speak the word AIDS until 1987, when 40,000 people in America had already had the disease and 21,000 had died. And then Dr. Fauci was the National Institute of Health's AIDS coordinator, who initially agreed with the Reagan assessment and then decided, in discussing with the AIDS advocates, realized it was something that was important. When did the gay rights movement begin and where? Was there an option for gender other than male and female on the 2020 census? And why did New York rename East River State Park in Brooklyn in honor of Marsha P. Johnson? So the gay rights movement is really kind of pinpointed to 1969 in New York City, called Stonewall. The 2020 census was supposed to have a gender other than male and female, but the Trump administration pulled that question, but in future census, it is believed that there will be. And then Marsha P. Johnson is given credit for being the first person to kind of throw a brick during the Stonewall protest. The trans folk were very involved, and she was killed later, and her body was deposited in the East River, and they renamed the park after her. So why did I tell you all that? Because your clients live through most of this. So let's look at Jim. When he was 1942, or when he was 1, the military has banned gays and lesbians from serving. When he was 27, so when most people during that period of time were married or had started families, that's when Stonewall and the LGBTQ activism really kicked up. It wasn't until he was 33 that he would have been, if he was out, allowed to work for the federal government. It's also when the first Minnesota filing for gay marriage happened. That did not go anywhere, obviously, except to kind of the tabloids, but he saw the reaction to that as well. In 38, he sees a prominent gay politician, Harvey Milk, assassinated. He's 44, really, when the AIDS crisis hits and Reagan denies AIDS money. He's also 44 when sodomy laws are upheld at the Supreme Court. He's 54 when the Defense Against Marriage Act is passed, and it's not till he's 71 that he can legally marry his partner. So this is someone who has spent the majority of his life in the closet if he wanted to be employed, if he wanted to feel safe. And so we have to keep that in mind when we are working with someone like Jim. In terms of Maggie, she was born in 1936. So when she was 16, she would have seen the news of Christine Jorgensen receiving the first reassignment surgery in Europe, which was also a tabloid sensation. She would have been 33 when transgender activists started Stonewall. She would have been 57 when the Minnesota anti-trans discrimination law passed. So she was 57 when it was made illegal to discriminate against someone like her. But she would have been 58 when it was finally removed as a designation of a mental disorder. And still, with that progress in 63, when she was 63, she would have seen that in Texas, a case rules against a trans woman receiving widow benefits because she was born a male. So why am I telling you all this? It's a reminder that our clients' living history affects them today. And we are going to watch a video of Harry, who is a Minnesotan, talking about how he sees the history affecting our Minnesota older LGBTQ adults.
I'm 73, and I will never stop advocating for myself or the community. Never. Somebody's got to speak up. Somebody's got to call it
And can somebody just give me a thumbs up that you can hear it in the chat?
out. I've had a very interesting life. I grew up in the Catholic religion in the Roman church.
Awesome. Thank
I
you,
went in the
Nancy.
Navy, had 3 children. At 37, I went back to school to get my degree and met a lovely lesbian professor who was teaching human sexuality, which started my journey of coming out. I knew I was a gay boy at 5. I knew that, but I had no place to talk about it. Because of the generation that we grew up in, we didn't talk about being gay or lesbian or transgender. I had a therapist tell me that, oh, you're confused. I wasn't confused. I knew I wasn't confused. But if you let them do that, they will. The older generation has a lot of trauma to overcome. When AIDS came to the forefront back in the 80s, we saw many people dying and very sick. The medical community was scared to death. They didn't see us.
I'm trying to see if I can get it louder.
They didn't hear us. They didn't want to see or hear us. In the height of the AIDS epidemic, they didn't want to touch people.
Okay, I think this is as loud as I can get it. I'm sorry.
They didn't want to treat them. And so now getting into the point where you need more help, the older generation is not going to trust. There's a total lack of trust that will be treated and will be taken care of the way we need to. There are a lot of elders who are HIV positive or full-blown AIDS. They live a very isolated, lonely life. And I think a lot of them are in fear because that's what we've experienced through life. Our elder community has learned to step back and not speak up, not say what they need. Right? I'll just step back and live my life until I die. It's not a healthy place to be. How do you live your life? Let's say the last quarter of your life, how do you live it well? I want to have the best life possible. I don't want to be laying in a nursing home, not being cared for, right? By somebody who doesn't even know me or understand me. We saw with COVID how people in nursing homes, long-term care, how it impacted them. That was heart-wrenching. I worked for Right at Home as a caregiver, and I had clients during that time. That was brutal. That was brutal to watch what happened, and to the elders, right? Because they're disposable. When I was like 50, I was looking for something. I wasn't a bar person. I didn't know how to meet people. An organization came on the scene called the Primetimers Minneapolis and St. Paul. It was an organization geared at gay and bisexual men, 50 and older. We had quite a range of folks that needed a place and just wanted a social venue. I think one of the things I saw was the loneliness of the elders in the community. We don't have a support system. I hope that we as a community, the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, questioning community, queer community, comes together to support each other in all facets, that we become intergenerational, that the younger folks realize the value of those that have gone before them. It's not that they ignore us, they just don't know we're here. Many of the elders have marched in pride parades, stood up against the legislature, have been out on the streets advocating for the community, but they're tired. They're tired. It's hard work. They need to know that their voices count. They need to know that.
Okay. Those of you who are hopefully, Harry, so that is, I don't know if I'm going to share Harry's last name, but you might know him. He's very involved in the community. And I would just love you to type in the chat if possible, how might knowing this personal lived history, so kind of what your clients have lived through as an LGBTQ folk, help you to serve them better? Oh, sorry. So Harry works with Prime Timers. He also works with Right at Home, which is a home service. Harry does everything. He volunteers everywhere. But yes, he works at Right at Home. He works for Volunteers of America, and he works for Prime Timers. And this video is available on our website, so I can link it to, I'll send a whole email to Amanda to share with folks. Yeah, it would help you get to know them better. Trauma-informed practice is so important. I know many of you work in that context. Knowing personal history raises my awareness and compassion. Exactly. Better service, sensitivity. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. It is always helpful to learn from someone's firsthand experiences, not just statistics. Thank you, everyone. Okay. So Harry touched on it a little bit. I just want to highlight a few things about HIV and aging in Minnesota, because it is something that isn't talked about a lot. But it's important to recognize that more than half of all people living with HIV in Minnesota are 50 or older. Older adults living with HIV show signs of aging on average 10 years earlier than the general population. 35% of older adults are diagnosed later in the disease process, and early detection can prevent many complications related to long-term untreated HIV. The thing to remember about HIV and LGBTQ older adults is this is the first time we're going through this. So we have never had 8 people living with HIV live for decades with the disease. We don't know what the effects of the drugs that we were throwing at the wall and testing in the 90s, we don't know how that might affect folks who have been living with the disease for a long time. We don't know how it will affect the body or the brain, even to live what's called UU, so untransmissible, undetectable. And we also know that we can have folks living with HIV who are UU, undetectable, untraceable, as long as they stay on their medicines. But we also know that it can be hard to continue to pick up your medicines. There can be, forgetfulness with medicines. And so how are we continue? And there can be a lot of stigma around having HIV. So that's something to keep in mind. So just so you can see, people living with HIV in the last census, 2020, we can see that the majority of people in the state, as we see, are 50 and older. We also recognize that, sorry, well, my chat's popping up. Okay, we can also recognize that the demographic of people living with HIV and still being diagnosed with HIV today is very different than it was in the 80s. So today, it is primarily people who are living with substance use disorders who are being diagnosed with HIV, and that's often a very different group than who was being diagnosed in the 80s. And there is a huge stigma around amongst older adults. It is a factor for anyone living with HIV, but more likely to impact older adults who lived through the 80s and 90s when it was considered a gay cancer, when people didn't even know if you could be touched or if you could be treated. There are older adults who may experience HIV stigma without having HIV. Just some folks still associate the two communities together. There's a greater risk of isolation and loneliness for people living with HIV who are older. It impacts quality of life, self-image, and care-seeking behavior. And we have found that there is more significant need to link older adults with HIV to supportive services to keep them engaged. And I'm just going through your chats, making sure. So Patrick brought up a really good point that older LGBTQ adults are also invisible to the younger queer community, which further isolates. That is absolutely true. Not only is the LGBTQ community a very broad community with lots of intersections, it also is one in which, as Harry talked about, our older adults have lived through a lot. They have lived through Stonewall. They have lived through the AIDS crisis. They've lived through the Defense Against Marriage Act. And then when they were in their older, in their later middle adult life, finally won a big, the Marriage Amendment Act. But that means they've been fighting their whole lives and they're exhausted. And then we have these young folks who are coming up, and many of whom are able to come out in middle school, high school, college, and live in some areas of society where it is more welcome. And they're not always giving the credit where credit is due, and that can be pretty difficult. Okay, so let's continue on. I just love to hear any recollections of people who have any recollections of the AIDS epidemic, or really how often do you think about HIV today? Because most of us don't anymore. So I would just love to hear in the chats if you have any recollections of the AIDS epidemic. I know I was born in 1980, and so my recollections of the AIDS epidemic are the quilt, as well as the Ryan White, which is now what funds all of our services. And Ryan White, of course, was the young boy who was pricked with a syringe. And that became a huge kind of moral or kind of panic around the country that kids would be getting poked with syringes. Does anyone else have any recollections of the AIDS epidemic? Yeah, Patrick says, when I came out in the 1980s, I stopped counting when I knew over 100 men that had died of AIDS. We just had a woman retire from our legal department who had been with the Minnesota AIDS Project, now Rainbow Health, for a very long time period. And she just talked about the fact that early in her career, she went to multiple funerals a week. And that is just unthinkable today. Yeah, we had a lot of patients who were afraid to touch, or a lot of people afraid to touch patients. I worked in Maryland prison system during the AIDS epidemic and gave them lots of meds for HIV. Oh my gosh, when the AIDS quilt came to the Metrodome, that was like a really big deal. I missed something about Phil Donahue. I need to go back to that. Oh, yeah. And he couldn't say what AIDS stood for. They had to correct him. And of course, Lady Diana made a huge impact by holding the children. In fact, many of us kind of forget now that the people who took care of the community members, besides the community themselves, which was priority, was a lot of folks like nuns and monks and, people, Elizabeth Taylor, who we don't think of as being kind of on the front lines of stuff, but they are. Yeah. Yep, being afraid to go into the hospice room. Magic Johnson was a big thing. Yep, it was definitely considered a gay disease. Let's see. The staff will maintain and encourage links to children, grandchildren, traditional heteronormative links, which many might not have, especially since many passed. Yes. HIV/AIDS was used as a way to generate homophobia and fears, especially in conservative church congregations. So I will be talking more about that chosen family stuff, Anna. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, there's a lot there. Thank you all. So we're going to get into the nitty gritty of the data for a minute so that we can kind of ground. We've had some of our stories. Let's ground it in some data. So based on the 2022 older adults, so we're talking 55 plus here, LGBTQ Minnesota needs assessment. What do we know? We know they're nearly twice as likely to be caregivers than the general population. And we have to remember that, as I saw a lot in your chats, the term caregiver is used much more broadly within this community. They are caring for their husbands or wives or their partners, but they're also caring for their chosen family. Oftentimes, they are the ones who are caring for their parents. So they are that first daughter that we talk about oftentimes. They are more likely to care for their larger community. As you'll see in the final one, they're nearly twice as likely to volunteer because this community has learned that they have to take care of themselves and they kind of have to be the change they want to see in the world. And so they are big volunteers. They are at the same time less likely to have a caregiver. They're half as likely to have children. They are more likely to live alone. And this is especially true for gay and bisexual men. And again, because of what they saw in the AIDS epidemic, they are more likely to have completed a healthcare directive. The big change that we have seen, so we have done this needs assessment in 2002, 2012, and then 21, 22. And the big change that we saw was the answer to this question. Do you feel that senior service providers would be sensitive to you if your sexual orientation and or gender identity were known? So in 2002, the answer was 9% felt confident in service providers being sensitive. In 2012, it was 18%. And that is when we started to build the curriculum that we use today, though it's been updated a lot. In 2021, we saw a huge jump in this answer to 85% of folks feeling confident. This is a huge development, and I think some of that comes down to, cultural changes. But what I want to really stress here is we know who fills out surveys. They are oftentimes white, highly educated, higher income bracket folks, and oftentimes cisgender. We know from our follow-up conversations that we held with key constituents after this that generally, if you have any sort of intersection, so if you are a person of color, if you are someone who is transgender, if you are somebody who is in a lower income bracket, you do not feel that the service providers would be sensitive. So we have made large gains in those white, lesbian, and gay cisgender folk, but we are still seeing a huge discrepancy with our transgender and our folks who are both LGBTQ and BIPOC. So as many of you noted in the chat, trauma-informed care is super important because even though we have a good group of folks responding, they believe there would be sensitive care, 50% of those folks responded that they have personally experienced harassment or abuse due to their sexual orientation. 53% of our transgender respondents have personally experienced it, and 75% of our respondents know of someone who's experienced harassment or abuse due to their sexual or gender identity. And so we know from this community that it has for centuries existed on a whisper network of who is safe and who is not safe. Who can you talk to? Who can you trust? And so there is always in the back of the mind, knowing that when you're treating someone, they absolutely know someone who's experienced harassment or abuse because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And they most likely have received it themselves. And so they're going to be on guard for that kind of treatment. So how does that affect our clients? So today, Maggie experiences high levels of anxiety whenever there is a new caregiver or home service who comes into her home because she's afraid of how she'll be treated by them as a trans person. She has told friends she might consider taking her own life if she starts to forget she has transitioned. So this is based on the 2020 Minnesota Transgender Aging survey that we did and focus groups. And we heard time and time again from our older trans folk that suicide was top of mind for them. We didn't bring it up, but they all did. That it was something that they were so scared about getting dementia and forgetting they have transitioned, or moving into a nursing home and being misgendered, or being forced to live as a different gender. This is a huge fear for them. And then we have Jim, whose friends want him to attend a grief support group or join a men's shed because he loves building things. They're unsure how long he can live independently. Jim has not joined any groups or research assisted living because he's worried what other participants or residents will think about him. Remember, Jim wasn't able to technically marry his partner till he was 71 years old. So he has 70 years of feeling like maybe he shouldn't be who he is. And so the idea of attending a grief support group for a same-sex partner is overwhelming to him. One of the things that we learned in our needs assessment is that support groups make a difference. Most of Minnesota LGBTQ folks are used to being in mainstream society. We don't have geographic centers where LGBTQ people hang out. We don't have a boys' town like Chicago. We don't have a Greenwich Village like New York. However, so they are very comfortable going. They're generally comfortable going and going to a dentist or going, to a grocery store that's not LGBTQ owned. However, they say the one place they really want LGBTQ only is support groups. So Jim is thrilled to discover a local LGBTQ grief group co-facilitated by a member of the community. And I want to have you listen to one more video of a local woman, Lisa, who is part of an LGBTQ dementia group. Woo.
I'm 70 years old. I've been an out lesbian for about 35 years. I was born and raised working class in New York City. Here's my mom and dad when they were married in 1934. I love this picture. I've lived here 35 years, but I'm a New York Jew at heart. I'm a retired educator and activist. I was a professor for 35 years at the U. I ran a program in social justice for undergraduates. I have something called vascular dementia. That's why I have my notes in front of me. It means I have challenges with my memory, and that's hard. I don't have Alzheimer's, but I've lived it with my partner of, I'd say, about 25 years. Her name is Pat Rouse. This is a picture of Pat at her retirement party when she was 65 years old, when she was in good health. Here's another shot of her from a while ago. And then this is a painting she did for me, and it says, to Lisa, February 14, 1994, for Valentine's Day, and it says, love, Pat. She lives in a wonderful memory care household. I visit regularly. We just celebrated her 82nd birthday, and the woman who runs it had balloons and ice cream cake. Pat can't speak, and she's in bed all the time, but she eats. She hasn't lost a lot of weight. She still looks great. Words come out that don't make sense, but she smiles when you see her. So that tells me that under that veil of Alzheimer's, she's underneath it, she's there. I think LGBT people who are caregivers have different kinds of needs around Alzheimer's, memory loss, dementia. Maybe we're not accepted by people in our life, families, friends, caregivers, or facilities where our beloveds could be living. Is the person out in the facility? You know, are you out? You know, what about your family? There's so many other factors that can complicate it that we have to pay attention to. And it gets messier if you're a trans person of color, if you're poor, if you have disabilities. You know, I'm lucky where Pat lives is a place where they love her. I wish there were more places like that, but I don't think there's enough of them. And the support that we need as caregivers is just as important because we carry the burdens of caring for our loved ones, and it's hard. I mean, it's not easy. I can't tell you that it's easy. I have good days and I have bad days. You know, I know the phone call will come one day and she won't be alive anymore, and that I don't want to start crying, but that's going to happen one day. I mean, I'm 70, she's 82. She's not going to live forever. And caregivers don't think about ourselves enough. Who's going to take care of us? I mean, that's if you're LGBT, if you're single, even if you're not single, we have different kinds of needs as LGBTQ people. For me, the best way to think about that is to create beloved community. To use the term that John Lewis, may he rest in peace, former congressperson, gave us, we need to have beloveds with us. Having community helps us get through tough times. And I think the many LGBTQ communities need each other to survive. And as we age, it's more and more of a challenge. And we need a space to be able to talk about that. I am a co-facilitator of this newly formed LGBTQ caregivers group. This kind of a group exists to give us space to have that kind of community. I think we need it desperately as LGBTQ people. We have to support each other. We're not great, even within our own communities, LGBTQ, being close with each other. And, you know, how much longer are we going to wait? At some point, you got to step up to bat. We're not going to live forever. You know, it's true, and we got to figure out how we're going to get through. And we can help each other. And that's kind of what the group is about. Let's create the world that we want. Come to our group, we need you.
Okay. All right, so what can I do? I've hit you with a lot of stuff, so now let's talk about what we can do. So the first thing you're doing is staff training. You know, we recommend people at all levels get trained on the history and on inclusive care, talking about the sexual orientation, gender identity, overviews of LGBTQ health, rights, guidelines, cultural awareness. Staff training is really important because that is really where it's that one-on-one. People feel safer when they are with folks who have received some sort of training. When a new home care attendant arrives and introduces themselves with their pronouns, Maggie is put at ease. She has learned to look for signals of acceptance, and the small gesture allows Maggie to feel more comfortable in her own home. So that is a beautiful little segue into pronouns. We have also put this in the training because it's something that we get asked for a lot. And so we're just going to do a little sidebar on training here, or on pronouns. So pronouns are how we refer to someone when we aren't using their name. They often denote gender. Using someone's correct pronoun is a way to affirm their identity. The most pronouns that you will hear, the most common are the she series, the he series, and the they them series. Sometimes they'll intermix them as well. Gender affirmation, transgender people sometimes change their name, pronouns, take hormones, and or surgically alter their bodies, but none of those are required to be transgender. And we have to remember that gender is less like a binary, if you hear the young kids talk, and more like a spectrum. And people can be more masculine, more feminine, and they might move on that spectrum as well. So the question is often, well, how am I supposed to know what pronouns someone uses? And you can't determine someone's pronouns by how they look or what their name is. So you can always ask, you know, as you heard when I started, I said, my name is Marin and I use she, her pronouns. You could then say, what pronouns do you use? Or you could just leave it there and let people make their own decisions as to whether or not they want to share that. Sharing your pronouns denotes you as a safe person and puts the power in the hands of the other person. There's lots of strategies to do this. I recognize that around the state, sharing your pronouns in different areas will get you different reactions. So you can do this by saying, you can have it on your video call name, which I do. You can see it says Marin Levad, she, her, hers. You can have it on your email signature. I have it there. You can have it on your name badge, your office door. I don't have one of those, but some people still do. Your voicemail when you meet, anywhere you want to share. The reason I'm seeing some folks are saying they're not fully understanding pronouns yet. And that is simply, that is okay. And we can sidebar about that later. I think the big thing just to remember is we've been using pronouns for centuries. We have been using they, them, their pronouns for centuries. It's just something we learn as kids, and it has become politicized when people transition from pronouns become very important to them because it helps kind of define who they are. So I do see that some folks have questions about pronouns. This is an absolutely safe space. You can direct message me if there's like a specific question you have about pronouns. I'm happy to answer it now. You can direct message me and no one else will see it, but I can answer it for the group. Otherwise, my email will be at the end of this, and you can email me if you are interested in learning more. I don't want you to get hung up. Okay, so yeah, so great question. So the questions that I'm seeing is sometimes people combine their pronouns. That is absolutely right, because, and this is generally young folks, let's be real. So let's go back. So some of the pronouns that we use are, okay, she, her, hers. So like hers is just saying like, that purse is hers. Well, that was really gendered of me. That soccer ball is hers when referring to Marin's soccer ball. Or if we were talking about someone who uses he, him pronouns, you might say, Albert, he is a dentist. I'm going with him to the store to get his toothpaste. And you would use the same with they. So Autumn, they are, so you would say, if you're talking about Autumn, you would say they are a dentist. I'm going with them to the store to get their toothpaste. And now I'm confusing people more. Oh gosh, okay. Basically, we use pronouns every day. And I think what I should do, because I can't see everyone directly and see if people are making sense, I can send you some more some more information when I email you, because I do think I'm confusing folks. But one of the questions, is about mixing, because we talked about gender identity being less like just there's male and there's female, and then there are people who we all have different, it's more of a spectrum. Some folks feel, and I will send you a video that explains this, that they can kind of mix and match depending on how they're feeling that day or what have you. And there really isn't a wrong one to use, is what they're telling you. And when you put pronouns next to your name, it's just telling people what they are. It is not saying that I am transgender. It is simply saying that these are the pronouns that I use. So anyone can use she, or we all have pronouns, every single one of us. They're a basic part of English language. And just by putting it out there, you are not saying that you are transgender. You are just letting others know what pronouns you use. So, yep. So I am a cisgendered straight white woman, and I use she, her, hers. And the reason I do it is to signal that I am accepting of people who use different pronouns. Yes. Okay. So, if they use mixed pronouns, as I said, wow. Okay. There's a lot of questions here. Okay. So I grew up with saying ma'am and sir and Mr. and Mrs. as a sign of respect to an older individual. Lots of people did, and lots of people still, especially within the African American community, that is a sign of respect. And so how do I respect these older adults? Well, you can absolutely still use Mr., Mrs., and Mrs. with folks who that is appropriate with, and we will get to when we know that in a moment. Most people will still use Mr., Miss. So I'm she, her, hers. So I go, you could refer to me as Miss or Mrs. Because I am married. There are definitely young people who are moving away from like ma'am and sir and using what we consider less gendered language. So instead of ladies and gentlemen, you might say friends, you might say y'all, there's lots of different ways, but let's not get too lost in the weeds there. That is kind of next level stuff. Once you know what their pronouns are, you can always ask. You can also always say, you can say your pronouns, and if someone tells you their pronouns, you can then use Mrs., Mr., or Mrs. as a sign of respect. And they will tell you. Okay. Sometimes we have difficulty remembering people's names. I've been afraid of this pronoun topic because sometimes I forget. It's not disrespect, it's just bad memory. So can you use more examples of situations where you would use the proper pronouns? Yes, more examples. So if you are talking to, okay, so let's say we use someone who uses they, them. So I'm talking about, I'm blanking on names. Okay, what's the name? I'm talking about Mike. Mike uses they, them. So I would say, I hung out with them this weekend. I went with them to the store. They like Cheetos. Or just like, if it's he, her, if they use she and he, you can use them interchangeably. Let's move from me making you all panic like this is, and I will send you more information about this. You can always ask. Okay, I'm gonna skip forward for a second. How to recover from mistakes. Because here's the thing, folks, We are all gonna make mistakes. And if it's not with pronouns, it's with something else. It's by forgetting someone's name. It's by mispronouncing someone's name. It's by mistaking one person for another person. We all make social mistakes all the time. It is just being human. And so the thing to remember with making mistakes is it is all in the repair. We do not expect people to move through this world in any context without making mistakes. And so all we need to know is that we simply say in honest and earnest, I'm sorry for misgendering you. I'm sorry for getting your name wrong. I'm sorry for mispronouncing that. Thanks for letting me know. I'll try better next time. That's it, folks. You do not need to drop to your knees and beg. I'm so sorry. I mispronounced your name, Marin. I can't believe I did that. I've been practicing. I will do. We don't need that full thing about making it about you or castrating yourself. It's simply just, I'm sorry for making that mistake. Thank you for letting me know. That's it. We're just all humans trying our very best. And I'm going back to the chat because I'm seeing that I'm still missing things. Okay. My daughter says if you're over 40, you get 1 million passes. I mean, yeah, you do have that. Okay, so ma'am and sir, not something that I personally used working at nursing homes, nor hun or honey. So ask what they pronoun to be preferred to be called. It's what most people identify with. Let's see. Someone is really struggling with colleagues for them not being openly homophobic and transphobic is not using slurs publicly, but otherwise they're totally intolerant and at best think LGBTQ people are sort of okay unless they're too visible to demand equality. There's a lot of people that think being PC is stupid. Yeah, man. Yes. That is very true. And here is a story that I heard from doing this chat down in southwestern Minnesota. And that is, Marin, pronouns are lovely, but I go into rural farmers' homes and I am a young woman going by myself into people's houses. I don't want to walk in the door and say, my name is Cheryl, she, her, hers, because that is going to get me in the wrong foot with some of these folks, and I don't necessarily feel safe. First of all, your safety is paramount as healthcare providers. So don't do anything that you feel would make you feel unsafe. Secondly, there's lots of ways to silently signal if you know you're in one of those situations. As I said before, this has been a whisper network for centuries. Just like Christians used to draw fish in the sand, LGBTQ folks have been signaling who is safe for a very long time. There is a woman who was in Southwest Minnesota who has her badge. She has her badge, and what she did is there was this thing that it looks like a barcode, but it is in rainbow colors on the side. And so folks who are looking for the signals of safety of you are going to be accepting of me immediately noticed that that was a rainbow. But anyone else looking at it just thought it was a work thing. It was just like how you scanned in at your job. And so there are lots of ways for, and I also always say that people who are looking for it see it, and people who aren't don't see it. So most people don't see the she, her, hers in my email signature. Most people don't read signatures, or they just scan over it, or you can always say it's an office policy. We're all required to do it. And then you don't have to be the one arguing. I think, unfortunately, leading by example is really, or just being yourself. I don't even want to say leading by example because there's no guarantee people will follow you, but just being yourself and authentically yourself is the only way that you can continue to work in that environment, it is very hard. I'm not going to say it's not right now. As we have saw from the ACLU, this is a hot button issue, primarily for political reasons, but the people on the ground don't recognize that a lot of what's happening right now is just an effort to raise more funds for a certain political campaign. And it's not because people really believe that all gender bathrooms are like the worst thing that's ever going to happen to us. Wow, I'm so far off where I'm supposed to be. When meeting a client for the first time, how does one ask what their preference is? There's lots of different ways. You could, again, just introduce yourself if you feel safe. It could be on your name tag. A lot of times we say it should be on your intake form. So it's just like a check the box so that you automatically know. That's an easy way to do it, and you don't even have to ask them. Or again, you can just put it off as it's just something we ask everyone. So, okay, there's so much. Y'all are asking such good questions, and I'm like way where I'm not supposed to be. Okay, I will send you more information about pronouns. I am here to talk if anyone needs more like one-on-one conversations about how they're doing. I am absolutely here for that. In the effort of time, I'm going to just go over a few more things that are in the training. Employee policies are great. Obviously, if you recruit from LGBTQ communities, if your employee handbooks or benefits cover LGBTQ folks, that's going to be a great way to ensure that your space is welcome to everyone. Body language matters the most. Even if you're messing up pronouns, even if you don't feel comfortable with that, the fact of the matter is what our clients say is a really low bar, makes them feel comfortable. They say, when I mention my husband or wife, my same-sex partner, they don't flinch. That's what our clients are asking for. You don't flinch in disgust when they mention their sexual identity. They don't miss a beat. I just get a vibe. They don't assume heteronormativity. They're not judgmental, but curious, friendly. They're saying, I'm learning about this. And you know what? I want you to be very clear, and I do this when I do disability trainings as well. Please remember that if you ask a question, if you're curious and someone that you're asking for doesn't want to be your teacher, or they are grumpy, there are grumpy LGBTQ people out there, friends. There are grumpy people in wheelchairs out there. It is not an indication that you have done something wrong, but just like you wouldn't deal with a grumpy straight man at your nursing home as, oh, well, that's because he's straight. I don't want you to say, I asked one gay person and they kind of snarked at me. Like, that might just be Jerry. Jerry just might be a jerk. Like, that's just how it is. So please keep that in mind. So we talked about the fact, we kind of already gone over this, but your clients are going to hit roadblocks, you know. Jim attends a birding workshop at his local senior center. He shares with the speaker that his now deceased partner brought him a pair of binoculars for his birthday. The speaker asked what his wife's name was. Will Jim ever return to the senior center? Maggie meets a volunteer house helper at her front door forgetting to put on her wig. The house helper greets Maggie with, "Good morning, sir." Is the situation doomed? It's not. We've talked about it. You simply recover from mistakes. You say, I'm sorry. You try better next time. That's all we're asking. The final thing I wanted to talk about is marketing and signaling. These things come last in our list because we have seen in this race for inclusion in some places, we've seen the Cheerio ads with the two dads. We've seen lots of, you know, happy gay couples golfing on the front of a brochure. But marketing has to come after you're truly working towards inclusion. You don't want to market that you're it seems like the easiest thing to do is slap a picture on a brochure and call yourself inclusive, but you really need to do the work first. And then once you're there, there's lots of ways to signal, as I discussed, the rainbow barcode. books in the lobby or magazines that represent all different types of lifestyles and folks, pins and stickers, rainbow flags, pronouns on the name tag. I'm not saying you have to do all of these, but if one of these seems to work with your organization, you can signal in lots of different ways that you are an inclusive and welcoming space. Okay, I'm going to stop the share. Y'all had so many good questions, and I'm going to take notes of all the things I said that I would email you because there's a lot to share. So I'm going to email folks a little bit more information about pronouns. It seems like y'all were getting it there and recognize that it is a learning process for all of us, except for, you know, my teenage daughter, who is like, this is so old hat for her at this point. You know, they are just, they're leaps and bounds beyond us. Okay, and then my email address, I'm going to put that in the chat. And if anyone has any additional questions or things that you just want like someone's ear to talk. Oh, that's my personal email. I'm sorry, please don't email me my personal one because I'll forget it. I don't know why I gave you that. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. And then I'm also going to grab the form for all of you. So that you can get your CEU for attending today. But I invite anyone to unmute if they want. And share stories, ask questions, or email me or message me directly, and I can we can have a discussion. We have 15 minutes left, or you here is this form for the CEU, and I will make sure that Amy sends that out as well. Is there any other information that would be helpful? Okay. How are kids learning this information? Gosh, where aren't they? It's just part of the vernacular now. It's just like things change, and yeah, social media, TV, but also, you know, my daughter just turned 13, and she can list probably 10 kids who since elementary school that she went to are now non-binary, use they them pronouns. It's just, I think when you're taught something as a kid, you just kind of roll with it. You know, it's not, granted I live in Minneapolis, so we should be very clear that it's a safer space for kids. You know, I'm a history day mentor, so I work with kids who do basically science fair for history, and tons of kids did their projects on LGBTQ issues. So that's how they learn. But yeah, it's just a wash in their media. It's just part of their growing up. Oh my gosh. Yep, so we are a SAGE collab, and they do have kind of a LGBTQ education for care facilities to attain, for sure. We are only able to give social work CEUs, as well as I can have our U of M partners give you nursing home or assisted living staff. I'm sorry, that's what we're able to give. That's what we're certified to do. Where we're going to be in 50 years, who knows? You know, we are definitely moving forward and back at the same time. But I think think about, you know, where our society was 50 years ago, where segregation was still a thing for a lot of people in the US.
She's not my patient anymore, though. I give her.
Actually, I'm just gonna thank you. Yeah, so things. Yeah, I think things will be really different in 50 years. I hope things will be really different. I hope everyone will be safer. That's what I hope. Thank you all. Hi, Adele.
Hi. Wonderful presentation. Thank you. I just had a quick question about what bills are being proposed to the legislature that we can advocate against discriminatory bills.
In the Minnesota legislature? Sure.
Yeah, I saw that we aren't zero bills proposed.
Oh, of course not. I would say, let me just pull up Minnesota. Okay. So there, if you go to the ACLU, I'll put this in the link and you can see which one are currently, like what the bills are. Because I think the thing to remember about the Minnesota bill, so I'm going to put the link in if you're interested in knowing what's currently being brought before the Minnesota state, is that right now Minnesota is it would be pretty surprising if any of these passed, just based off of the makeup of our legislature right now and our governor.
Oh, good.
But it's always good to know what people are saying and doing. So I put the link in the chat and you'll go and see. So currently there are 7 bills in the state. They're all advancing to committee, but that doesn't necessarily mean and majority of them. Oh, wait, hold on. I'm just double checking to make sure. They are exactly what you would expect. And because there's 7, because some are in the House and some are in the Senate, but the 2 of them, all of the bills, the 2 things that they're doing is both in Senate and House, people have brought forth banning transgender athletes and banning drag performances in public. Those are the 2 that are currently both in the Senate and the House. And I am not a policy expert, but I would be shocked if either of those made it much further in Minnesota.
Thank you.
But yeah, they're on trend. Those are the bills that are on trend right now for the US. All right, so I will be sending pronouns, CEU form, my contact information, and sharing the videos. But please feel free to reach out. It's hard to have those really deep conversations on a virtual, but I really appreciate all of you asking good questions and being open to this dialogue. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending. And like Maren said, we will get this information out to you along with the recording of the webinar. And then I think too, it was mentioned the PowerPoint. So if that could be included too, I think some requests for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Does anyone have any last minute questions? Otherwise, again, thank you for logging on. And again, thank you so much, Maren, for doing this.
Yeah. And thank you everyone for the work that you do. You are all doing amazing work out there. So thank you.